Okay. Well, welcome everyone. This is the first of 4 sessions called Implementing LEED for Homes on Your Project. And it's intended to be an 8-hour webinar series, so 4 parts that are 2 hours each. Over the next 4 weeks, we'll basically do this every week at the same time. And be able to kind of break up the content into chunks that way. Go over here. Just kind of a little bit of a background. Thank you all for signing up. This program is being put on by the Alliance for Environmental Sustainability. We are a nonprofit 501c3 organization with a mission for basically being a catalyst to advance market education. Through education, third-party verification, and partnership with other like-minded organizations. We've been involved with the LEED for Homes program since the program's inception in, I think it was around 2005 that the very early discussions started. And like I said, we were one of the very first 10 national organizations to get involved with LEED. And I've been doing a lot of other green building programs as well since then. And we do a lot of education around programs, and we offer regular free webinars on specific topics of interest, like we did one last month on black water remediation, and we've got one next month about a net zero remodel on one of the oldest homes in the country. So a lot of these are continuing education opportunities, and we encourage you to take advantage of those. As it relates to specifically with the LEED for Homes program, we are one of the leader providers in the LEED for Homes network. And you'll understand what that word provider means a little bit later. We'll get into defining that. And we're basically a Midwest organization, Upper Midwest. We work everywhere through Minnesota, through Michigan, Illinois, Ohio, Indiana, even a little bit into Georgia, a little bit into Missouri, and there's really no national limit, but the Alliance tends to be focused on the cold climate of the Upper Midwest. And as a LEED for Homes provider, we've registered nearly 9,000 units and certified over 4,000 homes in the LEED for Homes program. As a reminder, this is actually a course that's approved for continuing education, whether you are an existing credential holder with an organization such as NARI or AIA. And we also would like to definitely thank our one of our main sponsor organizations, Anderson Windows, who's been a 3-year sponsor of the Alliance at a platinum level. It makes it possible to do the work that we do. So a little bit about myself. My name is Jason LaFleur, as I mentioned. I hold a lot of credentials. I'm a LEED AP Homes, a LEED for Homes Green Rater, which is probably most relevant to this discussion today. And I get involved with other programs. I'm a verifier for the National Green Building Standard. I do some code review for the IECC, especially the IECC 2012, which is now mandated throughout the state of Illinois. I'm actually based in Illinois near Chicago. And I'm also an energy rater, passive house consultant rater, Green Star professional, so all kinds of fun credentials that I basically serve as a guiding force and consultant and verifier for a lot of high-performance residential construction, both single-family and multifamily. So we'll talk a little bit about both throughout the program. I also run my own firm called Eco Achievers, which is actually where I do most of that certification, consulting, verification work. And I volunteer locally with my U.S. Green Building Council chapter. And one of the things that we do that's kind of neat is we put on an annual tour of homes, which is getting kind of hectic. I probably won't be with you next week because the tour is the following weekend, and there's a lot of prep time and media interviews and all kinds of fun stuff that I get to do as the tour director for that But it's a great way to showcase and educate the public about the awesome work that we do as green building professionals. All right. So as I mentioned earlier, feel free to put into the chat a little bit about information about yourself. If you have any specific projects that you're working on, we really want to make this class be something that's relevant to you. And so what you'll see is that in between the 4 sessions that we're going to have throughout the next month, we have a little bit of a homework assignment, which basically involves you taking the information that we've gone through and applying it to a specific project that you're working on. And if you don't have a specific project, we have a case study that we can use in that instance. But the idea is it's going to be more useful and relevant for you to think about the information in terms of something that you're working on, rather than something that's that you're not as familiar with. The overview objectives for the 4 parts of this workshop are to become a little bit more familiar with the types of projects that are eligible for LEED certification through the LEED for Homes program. Definitely get an understanding of how to recognize the roles and responsibilities of the various stakeholders that are involved with the certification process. Recognize the goals, intents, and requirements of prerequisites, as well as the key credits and how people commonly will achieve them. And think about some of the impact that LEED has during the design and construction process, so that you can plan for those steps along the way. And there are lots of supplemental resources that are available in order to get a project LEED certified. And so one of the objectives that we have is to help you understand where those are and how to use them to the best of your ability. So a little bit of an agenda. As I mentioned, this is part 1 of 4. We'll be doing an overview of the LEED for Homes program today, as well as getting into the materials and resources content section. So this is a little bit different than the normal flow. We've kind of reorganized things into a way that makes a little bit more sense to break it up online. And so I'll be doing that first part today. Next week, Brett will go through the locations, linkages, sustainable sites, and water efficiency credit categories in detail. And then in 2 more weeks, we'll go through the energy and atmosphere and indoor environmental quality sections of the rating system. And the final week will be a wrap-up of the last 2 credit categories in LEED, innovation, as well as the awareness and education section. And we'll also get into a little bit more detail about navigating with the LEED for Homes checklist, the tool, talk about version 4 of LEED, and how that impacts the your projects and projects in the future, and kind of have an open forum for any process-related questions, registration, submittals, etc. And one of the nice things about this being recorded is that you can access this information anytime. So if something comes up next week and you can't make our webinar course, you'll get an email within a day or 2 directing you to the link where you can view and record the recorded archive of this of the session. So it's one of the nice benefits of doing things online. And it's also helpful as you do the homework, you may want to refer back to a specific section, as we were talking about a specific credit, and you'll say, oh, what was Jason talking about? He said something about the advanced framing measures. What was he meaning by that? And you could go back to the recording and watch that. So at this point, I'm going to switch over to the chat and see if there's any questions so far. I don't see any. So again, feel free to type any in as they come up, and I'll keep checking back. In the meantime, a little bit of overview of the materials. there is some of these things that are electronic. Probably the most relevant is the presentation material. So you'll have a copy of this PDF, a PDF of the slides that you're seeing, and be able to reference those in the future, as well as we'll be sending a link to you for the actual LEED for Homes rating system, so the actual language as it's written, which is kind of nice. They've actually now put it, it's available in a PDF format, or I've really come to like the online, it's basically like a database that's like a free version. You can go in and go credit by credit and see the specific text. And what's nice about that is that you can copy and paste that, whether you're developing project specifications or if you're, as I often find myself doing, responding to a project team email and you want to cite the specific language of the credit, you can do that. It's kind of nice. But we'll be sending you a link to that as well as the PDF. And finally, the main resource that's used during a LEED for Homes project is the Excel workbook file. And that will be sort of the focus of the homework that we'll be doing. All right. Kind of an overview of where this class falls in the context of credentials and other educational offerings from USGBC. We're kind of in a version of the Homes 252 course. So right in the middle there, you see it's sort of the mid-level understanding level type of workshop. So it's beyond the basic green building type of course. We assume that if you're here, you probably know a little bit about what building green already means. So we're going to kind of presume that you know things like what air infiltration is and what recycled content materials are and things of that nature. For those that might be interested in pursuing advanced designations, there is a LEED AP Homes credential available, and it's something that recently all of the exams changed for those that want to obtain a LEED AP, and the one exception to that is the Homes exam did not change. So it's actually, even though the other exams are now testing LEED version 4 content, the AP Homes exam is still testing content as you're going to be learning it throughout this course. So if you're thinking about earning that credential, you have time to do that. I spoke with somebody from USGBC at the AIA convention a couple weeks ago, and they informed me that this exam probably won't be changing for several months at the earliest, and probably, more likely not until the end of the year. So you got a good window if you want to earn that credential. And finally, the LEED for Homes Green Rater course. It's a 2-day training course. We're actually offering one in Chicago in about a little over a month. This allows you to be the verifier on projects. And this course that you're in right now is actually a prerequisite where it helps you meet the eligibility criteria for becoming a green rater. So that's kind of a more involved level of discussion, and I think we're going to be doing some mentoring site tours and things of that nature during that training. So if you're interested, it should be kind of fun. There's also the LEED Green Associate credential, which is some of you may have. It's kind of the entry-level tier of demonstrating some knowledge related to green building, applicable to both commercial and residential professionals, and even people that are sort of associated with the industry. So I know a lot of appraisers, for example, will get the LEED Green Associate, or vendors and suppliers, right? They're not designing and constructing these projects, but they do need to be aware of the criteria and the knowledge that goes into green building systems. And I think I covered the other two credentials pretty well already. So if you have any questions on this, feel free to type them in the chat, and I'll check them in a second. But first, kind of a little bit of context. The green LEED has several different flavors. Most predominant is the commercial rating system called Building Design and Construction, or BD&C. also used to be known as LEED NC for LEED for new construction, the very top item you see there. And it sort of branched off into other areas. The NC program was really designed for large commercial buildings such as offices and similar types of structures. And they've started to drill down into different categories, focusing on commercial interiors, focusing on existing buildings from an operations and maintenance standpoint. It's one of the questions you may get asked a little bit is, hey, can I get my existing home LEED certified through the existing buildings program? That program should be called something like Green Building Commercial Operations and Maintenance. It's really written for commercial buildings. I have worked as a energy rater. I have worked on some LEED E-bomb projects that are apartment buildings because they need to show that they've minimized the transfer of tobacco smoke between units. But it's really not a good fit for a residential type of occupancy, even if it's a 18-story tower like I've been working on. So that led the U.S. Green Building Council to create the LEED for Homes program, and it's something that really is applicable to everything from your traditional single-family home up to a low-rise apartment building, up to a mixed-use 4-story first-floor retail, 3 stories of apartments or condos above, all the way up to now they're currently saying 12 stories is the height limit for LEED for Homes through the mid-rise program, the LEED for Homes mid-rise program that we'll talk about briefly. And what the market has seen is that LEED for Homes and LEED for Homes multifamily mid-rise is a much better fit for buildings that are predominantly residential in nature. So that's going to be the focus of the course over the next 4 weeks, is the LEED for Homes program. And just remember, when we say homes, we may mean single family, we may mean multifamily. And what do we mean by LEED for Homes? So it's really the opportunity to transform something. This is an example of a project, a case study that I happen to know the builder pretty well. He took a foreclosed home in a blighted part of town, right? I mean, this could be any town USA over the last 4 years. And really did a transformational renovation to this, meeting the gut rehab requirements of LEED for Homes. And part of the way he met the gut rehab requirements was by doing this continuous insulation sheathing that you see over in the top right photo. And doing some spray foam injection in the walls, some cellulose. Some walls weren't opened up, and he just dense packed from the attic, and ended up taking this house and did a really remarkable job turning it into a nice new home that was sold at a comparable rate to other foreclosed homes that were being flipped in the area. The difference was this was the very first home to achieve both LEED Platinum and the NHB Emerald remodel in the country. And the builder did this on spec at a very affordable construction cost. Those of you familiar with renovation construction costs probably recognize that that's a pretty nice cost, especially if you're including your profit in that. And so it's just sort of showcasing that it really is a way to sort of LEED is sort of a way to identify several metrics around a building as they relate to sustainability, defined in various credit categories. And so what you'll see over on the left is this little scorecard, or nutrition label, as they like to call it, are some subcategories: locations, sites, water efficiency, energy and atmosphere, materials, resources. These are the credit categories in LEED, and underneath each credit category, there are various mandatory measures or prerequisites, as well as several credits that will basically, if you do an item, you will be or meet a certain level of performance, you'll receive points for doing so. And the idea is that the more points you accrue, the higher the level of certification. right? So your typical range on a LEED home project is once you get below 60 points, 45 to 60 points, you're at a certified level. You add some more points, you're up under 75, you're at silver. Under 90, you're at gold, and if you're above 90, you're at LEED Platinum, so that's the highest level of certification. And we'll talk about that a little bit more because there's a little bit of a asterisk as it relates to the points scale themselves, but the idea is that we want to reward higher levels of performance, and that one way to assess that is through the combination of these points that are accrued. So let me flip back over to the chat, and is the home in the Chicago area? Yes, the home that I showed, the foreclosure, was actually in Elgin, Illinois. It's a western suburb of Chicago. That was a gut rehab project. All right, so let me go back to the presentation. All right, so we're going to go into the kind of an overview of the LEED for Homes program, right? So a little bit of market information to kick things off here. We recently hit a milestone of, or the USGBC program hit a milestone of 50,000 units certified throughout the, this is actually throughout the world, because there are now some international LEED for Homes projects going on. So what's interesting is that a large percentage of these units certified are multifamily, and a fair number of them, nearly 50%, are affordable housing. So, right, there's some kind of maybe some incentive or tax credit program or something similar that's incentivizing developers to achieve LEED certification. Another thing that's worth noting is that a lot of these certifications have happened in very recent years. And if we add on the residential units that might have been certified in LEED through a different program than LEED for Homes, such as a high-rise residential building in New York that's 30 stories that I know of that went through and got LEED new construction certified. When you start to look at those as units, residential units, it's over 150,000. So, kind of a broad way to look at it. It's a little bit too big, I think. I like to focus more on the straight LEED for Homes projects. And you can kind of see how that's changed over the past few years. A lot of momentum happening here on a year-by-year basis, right? So this is not a cumulative. This is an annual breakdown each year. And there's actually a lot of this data that you're seeing actually came from a report that was released about, I think it was about 3 weeks ago, called LEED in Motion Residential. So if you Google that, it's like a 20-page white paper all about the LEED for Homes market, what's involved, some case studies, etc. Kind of a neat document. In terms of cumulative numbers, you can see the registrations are really grown. They've continued to grow and follow this trajectory over time. I always like to say there's not many charts related to the housing industry over the past 6 years that look quite like this, unless you're talking about the rates of foreclosures. So and I think there's a lot of drivers for this. We talked about incentives a little bit. I think there's a lot of more public awareness and interest in having green certified buildings as well. And in some developed real estate markets, you're starting to see things like value premiums for certified green buildings. So lots of different drivers. And that kind of, leads to the question, why are people going through this? And it's different for everybody. Sometimes there might be a developer incentive. Cincinnati is an amazing municipality. They've seen a lot of growth in the past few years, reinvestment in their urban core, and the way that this was achieved was that they basically decided to give residents in Cincinnati a 15-year property tax abatement if they achieved various levels of LEED certification. Right, so you got people that didn't care anything about energy efficiency, planning to build a home. All of a sudden, they're like, "Whoa, what can we do to get this certified so we can get our property taxes waived?" Some municipalities have incentives like that. That's not too common, though. What we're seeing more is that, especially from the public, from the consumer side of things, on the custom home side, as well as the market rate spec homes, people are really interested in the savings. The economic impact is, of having lower energy bills is appealing to everybody. But I find that the healthy home aspects really resonate with consumers more than the economics. And, if you have somebody in your family that has some kind of health issue like asthma or allergies, you understand the value of having them in an environment where those triggers aren't happening as often as they might have been before. There are also, one of the reasons I think a lot of affordable housing has embraced third-party green certifications like LEED, Enterprise Green Communities, etc., is that you have this, you have a rater or auditor or verifier coming through and providing a third-party check on that various measures were implemented. So there's an enhanced level of trust that the buildings are built as they're supposed to be built, not just as drawn up in design. So, like I said, different reasons for doing different things. So let me go over to the questions real quick and see if anything came in. I don't see any questions, but again, feel free to type any into the chat box as we're going through. Again, this is some data from that LEED in Motion report. You can see where there's a lot of activity, and it's no surprise that an area like Cincinnati, which has a great incentive, is really within the top 10 states for LEED certified units. Number one is Texas, and well, actually California is now number one. It used to be Texas. And it's interesting, like builders in the Dallas area, there's a lot of people that are doing great work, and just they're doing it on a production builder basis, creating these creating LEED certified homes. And when you start to get into a production environment or a multifamily environment, there are some nice things that we can do in terms of sampling in order to help. Once a level of quality control is demonstrated, we can look at testing those on a sampling type basis. Okay. Internationally, we've seen some growth as well. You can see the USA is obviously number one, Canada number two. A lot of growth in Asia. Starting to see some inquiries in South America as well. I've sent out a few proposals in that area. And the Middle East is another hot spot of just building in general, not just green building, but any kind of building really. So it's kind of an interesting growth that we're seeing around the world. This is if you do a search on Google Trends, if anybody's played with that tool, it's kind of a neat tool. It lets you kind of search what people are looking for, and you can see phrases like, if you compare the phrase green building versus the phrase LEED, you can see that there's a lot more searches around, twice as much over LEED versus the general phrase of green building. So it's kind of like, you might, like some people use various brand names for certain products. It looks like there's a little bit of that happening in the market. So let's see. All right. Getting to the valuation side of things, I used to train real estate appraisers, so this is a topic that's kind of near and dear to me. How can green homes be valued more? What's the impact on value from having building green? And we start to see some really neat trends and data coming out, such as ResNet, the energy rater organization, partnering with the University of North Carolina to kind of do a mass data analysis of 70,000 homes that were certified to the Energy Star standard, and saw that this was when they compared that with some loan performance data, they could see that these certified homes had much lower default risks. So lower default rates make investors happier, right? If you can maybe think about creating something like a green commercial mortgage-backed security that has a better investment grade because it's a better loan portfolio. We might see a little bit more interest from the financial markets in this, and then demand and products from lenders that are offering loans based on attributes of the building, whether that be a HERS rating hitting a certain number or a certain level of certification, etc. And there's lots of little localized data published as well, such as this one a couple years old now in California that did a mass analysis and saw that having a green label, whether it be LEED, whether it be NGBS, or whether it be in California, there's a local program called Green Point Rated. Whether they were labeled or not, there was a 9% value premium for those certified homes, right? And that's something that appraisers in that market can use as a reference point. I kind of alluded to this earlier, but when you look at homeowners, what their motivations are, number one is that they want a healthier place to live. That's going to trump anything related to being net zero or having lower operating costs and sending less money to utilities. Everybody likes that idea as well, but the human health is paramount. And what's interesting is that if you've been involved with green building for a while or sustainability, you've probably heard of the triple bottom line of people, profit, and planet. Well, we kind of see that echoed here in these top three reasons for or benefits of a green home. Here's a nice anecdote from somebody that had some asthma symptoms that were significantly reduced after moving into the green home. And one of the things that the industry, I think, still needs to work on is getting there's a lot of qualitative data out there around health, but there's not as much quantitative data as it relates to homes. And I know it's a hard thing to do, but I think it would really be helpful if we could see some more of that. So I think there are some studies being worked on, but the data's not out there yet in any large fashion. So a lot of these programs that are referred to in a lot of these studies basically look at third-party certification, and this is actually something that we're seeing more often, whether it be LEED or Passive House or Energy Star or NGBS. There's value in having an independent rater come out and verify that program standards are being met and that the building's performing as it's supposed to be. There are some self-scoring programs out there, but if you think about it, that's kind of like the fox watching the hen house. So, that independent third party is really a critical aspect underlying the program integrity. So, some case studies. Here's a multifamily project up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. This was a supportive housing, so people that were formerly homeless, giving them a place to live and land on their feet. A mix of studio, one-bedroom apartments, all designed to be ADA accessible. You never know who's going to be in some of these units, so rather than try to adapt them or meet minimum levels of ADA, they just did it throughout. They also did some reuse on the foundation. There was actually an existing structure that they built on top of. They had a decent HERS rating on this. Not spectacular, but it was again affordable housing. This is this organization's actually learned from this and gone on to do much more impressive things. In fact, they're planning a net zero 100 unit building in Wisconsin. That's should be a really great project, meeting the Living Building Challenge. But you have to start somewhere, right? And so doing things like basic smart attention to Energy Star appliances, paying attention to indoor air quality by providing continuous ventilation, building a tight envelope, efficient lighting. These are all relatively low-hanging fruit that, when put together, deliver some pretty good performance. Another project, this one's in Columbus, similar type of use, actually, and the difference was this is a very small site, very dense, so they got a lot of, by being dense, that is actually something makes a building typically in a neighborhood that's more walkable, and that's rewarded in the LEED program, so that access to the community, options for transportation, etc. And this building also included some common areas for the residents, and so you kind of have a sort of a mixed use type of application here. One of the things that's different is that this is a 4-story building, so it actually went through the LEED for Homes multifamily mid-rise instead of the LEED for Homes low-rise program. And the difference there is that it has to exceed the ASHRAE 90.1 energy model standard by at least 15%. So this one achieved 20%. So I really like the phrase that green begins with blue. If you look at any green building, it really comes down to the foundation being energy efficient, and then you can build on items that address indoor environmental quality and then resource efficiency. And you can see what I mean by those. Whoa, sorry about that. And you can see the various standards there that kind of get into some aspects of this. And then there's, the idea of building towards net positive types of buildings. So buildings that are maybe even restorative. And that's really what that Living Building Challenge is about. It's a very, very aggressive standard. Not many residential buildings are going through that, and very few commercial buildings. I think there's only about 5 that are certified right now. And what's interesting is that this program actually requires at least about a year of post-occupancy data to show that it really is net zero, or that it really is, nearly net water zero, in addition to net energy zero. And so it's something to strive towards, right? And the point is that there's different programs in place for different program goals and project constraints. And so, LEED fits into the mix as being one of the more comprehensive ones that addresses energy efficiency, indoor environmental issues, as well as resource efficiencies. So, sorry about that. Another way to look at this is looking at it in terms of practices over time. Or sorry, not over time, but where typical building practices are, such as, around the country, a lot of people are currently doing the 2009 IECC. Some states have adopted the 2012 IECC, which is kind of aligning with energy. I'm sorry about this background noise, folks. Anyway, so I like to think of green building as a continuum that kind of goes through. There's different shades of green, and it's something to keep in mind as a contextual background for where LEED is and where LEED fits in the scheme of things, and where other programs fit in the scheme of things, such as the Challenge Home program, which recently was relabeled the Zero Energy Ready Home. As well as even basic common denominators like the HERS index, which is used really in many of these programs that are out there. HERS is something specifically related to the energy aspects and used as a way to get points in the energy sections of programs like LEED, like National Green Building Standard, like Enterprise Green Communities, and the Challenge Home, etc. So, we've actually got a full hour presentation on this, on various green building programs, which you may want to check out. It's a webinar too, I believe. So If you want to learn more, you can check that out. And just kind of to recap this discussion, 1 in 5 buildings, 1 in 5 is an important number to think about as it relates to third-party certifications. 1 in 5 buildings last year, as of last year, we're getting some level of green certification. So it's a big part of the market. Okay, specifically back to LEED for Homes. What's eligible for homes? What's the LEED for Homes project? So we saw that single family, of course, could be a project that is eligible. If you have attached single family homes like townhouse style buildings, that's something that could be pursued. The way that LEED looks like at that is kind of like a code where you have each one is treated as a single family home. They just happen to share a wall. Rather than a multifamily building, which is where you start to have stacked units, right? A unit on the second floor is different than a unit on the first floor. Then you're in a multifamily situation instead of a single family situation. And there's not really a cap in terms of number of units that can be in a building that's pursuing LEED for Homes. I've worked on a couple buildings that are around 270 units. So it's about as big as you can get on some of these larger multifamily projects. And what is worth noting is that there are some universal requirements, though. So any project by code, the building must be defined as a dwelling unit. I'm sorry, not by code, as per LEED for Homes. And what a dwelling unit consists of is having a independent bathroom or private bathroom and a cooking area. So it could be like a kind of like a food prep area of some sort and a bathroom. The project must have a LEED for Homes provider and Green Radar involved. And LEED is a building level certification, so you're not going to get a certain unit in a condo building certified without the other ones being certified. It really is at the building level. In terms of the types of buildings eligible, you'll see that there are everything from the multifamily, like we talked about, up to the mid-rise and mixed-use types of projects, through the kind of program called Multifamily Mid-Rise, which we'll talk about in a minute. And we could do gut rehabs as well. So that foreclosed home that I showed as a case study was a gut rehab project that went through LEED and Energy Star and NGBS, and that was eligible. Now, had it been a project that was a more basic remodel or maybe just an addition onto a home or something, that's one of the areas that LEED does not get involved with. So if you're thinking of a project of that nature, LEED is not going to be the right program for you to look at. It really needs to be, and ultimately what it comes down to is that the rater has to be able to do, just like an Energy Star, they have to be able to do a thermal enclosure checklist inspection, which means verifying the continuity of the insulation throughout the envelope. So if the rater can do that, then you may be able to pursue LEED. Most likely will be able to pursue LEED. If they can't verify the continuity of the thermal, of the envelope, basically, then it's probably not going to be able to go through the LEED program. But every case is a little different. So of course, if you're in one of those situations, talk with a rater, talk with a LEED for Homes provider, and they can guide you. All right, so low-rise multifamily, some things that are kind of interesting, little things to know about, is that you can have low-rise is basically 3 stories or under. There's a little bit of flexibility in the story height limit on that. If you have buildings or units that have their own HVAC and water heating, right, so there's no centralized system, then you may be able to go through the low-rise program if you are a taller building. For example, actually yesterday I was in a 4-story building, 12-unit building, north of Chicago, doing some final testing and verification. And this project was going through LEED for homes low rise, even though it was a 4-story building, and that was because each unit had its own furnace as well as its own water heater. So it kind of comes down to the mechanical design and setup. The other thing that's worth noting is that in these multifamily situations, typically people are doing a HERS rating or energy modeling on a unit-by-unit basis, and then basically the whole building is scored as the worst performing case. So if you have a lot of units that are in like HERS 62, HERS 63, HERS 67, and then you get into what we see actually commonly is middle floor, middle interior unit might have a HERS 82 because there's just not as much exterior envelope and not as much of an opportunity to improve on the HERS rating against the baseline. So what that means is that the whole building is rated in LEED as if it has a HERS 82, basically going with the least common denominator. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a moment, actually. But real quick, I wanted to see if there's any other questions that have come in about the program. Nope. Okay. As we go throughout the program, this workshop, everything we're going to be talking about is applicable to both both multifamily and single family. Although certain cases of they may show just a single family house or something of that nature, but all the credits are the same for low rise and single family. And actually, I'd say about 80% of the credits are the same between a single family low rise and the multifamily mid rise rating system. So much of what you're learning today is going to be applicable if you're working in any kind of residential type of project that's pursuing LEED. Okay, we talked a lot. I've mentioned HERS a lot, and it's probably a good time to pause for a moment and talk about what a HERS rating is. It may be a new term for some of you, and basically what it is it's a national standard developed by an organization called ResNet that includes an energy design review, thermal bypass inspection, or in other words, looking at the thermal boundary or the envelope of the building and verifying that. Then doing a final inspection to see if everything is as planned, built as planned. And at that point, doing some final performance testing, as you can see in the photo here. This HERS rater is doing a blower door test to measure the home's performance. And that all comes together into a final HERS rating, right? And so the HERS rating is basically a number that encompasses all of the energy aspects and attributes of the building. Everything from heating and cooling, to water heating, to lighting, to appliances, to the envelope, all included in here. And what you see is that you end up getting a score of a certain amount that let's see where the average LEED certified home is around 65. Most of the homes that I'm working with are actually probably, I'd say the average is probably a little bit lower than that. So it really depends on your market and the builders that are and what they're doing, their level of performance. But basically what this means is that if you were building the code, you would have a HERS rating of 100, a typical new construction. And if you were building zero energy, the goal that a lot of people are trying to get to, in theory, you would have a HERS score of 0. In reality, it's a little bit different than that. We see homes that are operating net zero with a HERS score around, and I've seen some as high as 20 in my climate that are actually operating net zero because of the occupant lifestyles as well as the size and features of the solar photovoltaic array and et cetera. So at the end of the day, it's a predictor of performance based on typical consumption, and it's basically an asset rating on the building in terms of what its energy score is going to be. And kind of like golf, the lower the better. And as I mentioned, a lot of programs use the HERS rating in their criteria. And you can kind of see, I really like this slide by the Rocky Mountain Institute that's put together sort of a map of, kind of mapping out where a lot of these programs are hitting in terms of the typical HERS rating. So you can see in the middle there, LEED homes around 70. I actually kind of think that should be a range instead of a flat number. Kind of like Energy Star is up above, or Enterprise, etc. But whatever. Nobody's perfect. So what's nice to show is that this kind of gives you a feel for increasingly, in terms of performance, energy performance, it's a yardstick that all of these green building programs are using. Everything from code. In fact, the 2015 version of the code is actually introducing an alternative pathway for HERS score to meet code. So I know in Climate 5, if you're at a HERS 54 or lower projected, you will be able to get your building permit by meeting the energy code through that way. And you can see all the way down to things like passive house, very aggressive types of construction, all the way down to the zero energy type homes. So anyway, it's a kind of a nice way to a roadmap of a lot of the programs and based on their HERS rating. So just something to keep in mind, and something that we're seeing a little bit more common. So this is actually market data in Chicago. Number of listings in the MLS that have been listed with a HERS rating versus sold. So it's something that's the market's starting to see a little bit of reaction to, which is nice. And what you'll see is on a HERS rating, when you get this, you'll see in the very center, right underneath the stars, you'll see the HERS index 27. So this is actually a HERS certificate for a project that was also Passive House certified. It shows you the conditioned square footage, which includes the basement. That's important to note if you're in a cold climate with basements. It's the same number we use in LEED too. We don't look at the real estate square footage, we look at the conditioned square footage. Some of the attributes of the home, and what's nice is you start to get into like dollar cost, annual estimated energy cost, etc. So the LEED for Homes low-rise programs all use the HERS score, and the lower the HERS score, the more points you receive in LEED. Once you start to get into the mid-rise multifamily buildings, it's a little bit different. The performance path, EA1, as you see here, is not measured based on a HERS score. It's measured based on how superior you are, or the design is to an ASHRAE 90.1 energy model. And that discussion is beyond the scope of this class, but just know that it takes into account much more comprehensive energy loads and inputs that are typical in a larger commercial type of style of construction. Oh, one note on this, actually, with LEED version 4 moving forward, it's going to be started to be implemented next year. Right now, project teams that are pursuing LEED have the choice of going through multifamily mid-rise or going through the LEED new construction program. Moving forward, that won't be a choice anymore. If they're below 8 stories, I think, they have to go through multifamily mid-rise. And if they're above 8 stories, then they'll have the choice of going through LEED for Homes, multifamily mid-rise, or LEED new construction. So one of the other, some of the differences here is that it's different from what people are used to seeing in the commercial world, some of the prerequisites, and we'll talk about that in a couple of weeks, I think, some of the specifics on that. So tune in later for more on the mid-rise projects. But here's a quick case study. This is actually a project I worked on. I certified. It achieved LEED for Gold, or LEED for Home Silver certification up in Minneapolis. It's a great project. 6 stories, 284 units. First floor was a Whole Foods. And they actually built this around an existing parking deck that they reused as parking for the residents. This one, at first, their energy model, they weren't actually going to achieve the required 15% above ASHRAE 90.1. And so the project team decided to do some continuous exterior insulation and that actually made a significant change and pushed them over the edge on their 90.1 energy model. So there was one of the things that we found in doing the testing on this building is we found things like, for example, the microwave hoods don't really do a very good job of exhausting air, and they don't, although they're designed to meet the ASHRAE 62 exhaust requirements, in practice, once you add ductwork and everything, we didn't find any that were actually, we found some that were meeting the standard, but some that were not, and that's just kind of an example of, the specifications and design are one thing, but how it gets installed in the field and how it actually performs is another. We did find that the bath fans were doing exactly what they were supposed to be doing, which was good. And they had already been planning to take kitchens' exhaust to the exterior, as well as bringing in fresh air, which are two of the challenges with the multifamily mid-rise program for the traditional commercial construction market. They're not used to taking kitchens' exhausts to the exterior. But that is a prerequisite in LEED for homes. All right, so I'm going to jump over to questions, see if any came in. I don't see any, so I'll move on to the rating system itself. Talk about the structure. So we have 8 credit categories and 18 mandatory prerequisites. It sounds a little misleading. It sounds like, that's not too bad. But some of these prerequisites have many different components to them. And then there's a total of 136 available points in the rating system. And that's just sort of how the points accrued and how they came together. Actually, in LEED version 4, it's going to be like any other LEED system. It'll be a max of 110 points. But I digress. So the 8 categories in LEED for homes are shown here. We're going to go through each of these, actually, in detail throughout the webinar series. So we've got, this week, we're going to go through the materials and resources section. And then, like I said, next week, Brett's going to walk through the location and linkages, sustainable sites, and water efficiency. And then I think I'll be doing the indoor environmental quality section and energy and atmosphere section. And finally, the last sessions will be innovation design and awareness and education. And so how the rating system is weighted kind of changes based on these various categories. The biggest focus is going to be in energy and atmosphere, right? That's actually in the word LEED, stands for Leadership in Energy and Environmental Development. So 38 available points in energy and atmosphere. And one of the ways that this is different from the commercial versions of LEED is that there's a much higher emphasis on the indoor environmental quality section. So it's one of the next biggest categories is IEQ. Because kind of represents the fact that, we may have people living 24/7 in some of these units, and we need to pay attention to delivering a higher standard of indoor environmental quality to those occupants. The other part of LEED for homes, we don't really get into anything post-construction or post-occupancy. So the other versions of LEED, they do mandatory energy reporting, etc. That's not the case in LEED for homes, but to circumvent that, they do require some awareness and education credits. So it's only 3 points, but there are some prerequisites there too, like making sure that the people that move into the home, whether it's single family or multifamily tenant, that they understand what they're moving into, and they know why their bath fan might be running continuously, or how to change the filter and help maintain that air quality, etc. So that's really where LEED gets in, or how the rating system gets into the occupancy or operations and maintenance phase of the building life cycle. There are some categories of those categories that have minimum point thresholds, And this is worth noting because you might have this area like water efficiency. There's a credit category there, and there's, I think, somewhere around 8 or 9 points available. But what's interesting is that there are no prerequisites. So you might be tempted to say, oh, well, I can build a LEED building, not do anything. Put in 6 shower heads and keep the old 6-gallon per flush toilets or, whatever, and not have to worry about it. So the issue is that even though there are no prerequisites, there are still a minimum number of points that are needed to be met in that category. So what this is saying is we don't care what you do in water efficiency, but you need at least 3 points somewhere. And same with the other ones. The other areas, it's fairly typical that people are going to achieve those minimum points in each of those other categories. Sometimes the IEQ section, believe it or not, is actually near the borderline. But the biggest issue I've seen with this, again, is the water efficiency area. Okay, so here's an interesting aspect of LEED for homes and LEED mid-rise is that there's this thing called the home size adjustment. And basically what this is sort of a proxy for the embodied energy and materials that are in a building. Saying, the smaller and more efficient the building, the less materials and energy that go into that place to begin with, and also the least amount of energy needed to maintain that building performance going forward. So what they've done is sort of taken some average size data that comes from NAHB Research Center data from a few years ago, and looked at, okay, so the average one-bedroom home was, if you look at the gray line, this is the neutral line, so was around 900 square feet. The two-bedroom size home or apartments were 1,400 square feet. 3 bedrooms, 1,900 square feet, etc. So what you basically do is you find out your number of bedrooms or rooms that could qualify as a bedroom. You might have a room in a below-grade basement, for example, that meets code for egress windows and can qualify as a bedroom. That could be included in your count. And the idea is the more bedrooms, the more potential occupancy that building may have. And when you factor in the square footage, that sort of determines a point adjustment threshold to the overall certification level. So remember from way back a while ago, I showed the certified silver, gold, and platinum. So to get LEED certified is 45 points was the baseline, right? But if you're building a 5-bedroom home or 4-bedroom home that's 2,500 square feet, for example, what will happen is you'll look at 4 bedrooms, come down to 2,500, and that's actually -1. So instead of 45 points, you would only need 44 points to get to the minimum LEED certified. So it's basically rewarding those smaller size homes, and this is really helpful for a multifamily type of project. Affordable housing, some multifamily, Habitat for Humanity homes. Not uncommon to see, negative point adjustments of -9, -10, and that's as far as they go. They'll only adjust it by 10 at the most on the low end. The flip side of this is that the larger custom single-family homes that start to get much bigger end up getting a point penalty. So, a couple of the projects, I was recently at a 4,500 square foot home that had, I think, 4 qualifying bedrooms. And so it's off the chart here, but it was about an 8-point adjustment, I think. So what that means is that instead of 45 points, that project team has to now earn 53 points in order to get to the base level of LEED certification. So it's sort of a penalty for those larger sized homes. So this kind of helps prevent people from building a 50,000 square foot, mansion and calling it green, right? So it's still possible, I suppose, if you really wanted to rack up the points, but it just makes it much more challenging. And what's nice about this, you don't have to memorize the chart or anything. When you go to the checklist, you can, on the summary tab, you enter in the number of bedrooms and the number of square feet, and the checklist automatically adjusts the point thresholds for you. So it's kind of done, it's a built-in formula. Okay. Any questions on that home size adjuster? Okay, I'm going to talk about the LEED for Homes team a little bit, how it gets delivered. So you have the U.S. Green Building Council putting out the standard called LEED for Homes, and then you've got a design and construction team working to build to that standard, maybe using a LEED AP homes, although honestly that's rarely the case. There's not a whole lot out there, so I don't see many projects that have a LEED AP homes on it. And the other aspect is that there's a verification team. So this is a combination of the provider as well as the green rater. And you can kind of think of the provider as a quality assurance organization, and the green rater as the actual person that would come out to the home, verify measures on site in the field, do performance testing, etc. So, USGBC, their role in the process is basically to create the standard and the education materials out there and provide teams with marketing materials and actually do the home certification process. The verification team is comprised of two individuals. The green rater, like I said, they're doing all field verification. And one of the nice things about LEED for Homes versus LEED Commercial is that there's not as much documentation. So the green raters still need to get some supplemental items like spec sheets and cut sheets for your landscape plan and plant list and the water fixtures that are going to be used. But there's not the extensive documentation that you may have heard of with a LEED project in the commercial realm, because a lot of things they can verify in the field visually, right? If somebody's claiming the credit for pipe insulation on their hot water lines, I'm going to go and see that during my pre-drywall visit, whether or not it's in place. And we don't need to. They don't need to submit invoices of how many feet of pipe insulation was purchased or something like that. I just look for it and check off if it was done. So that helps streamline the process in some respects. And the green rater is really somebody valuable to have involved early in the process. I like to tell people. They're like, well, when should we talk to you about being our rater? I'm like, probably yesterday, because you're making decisions as you go along, and even if it's not a heavy involvement, there's still some value that talking to a rater early in the process can really help provide. If things like site orientation are flexible, the rater can talk about, what's the impact of solar orientation and thinking about how radiant energy from the sun is going to be managed through shading and things of that nature. The other aspect is that the rater, besides getting involved throughout the process, they're actually the ones that are responsible for taking the final submittal package from the project team. So the final submittal package we'll go through in a little bit. It's basically the documentation that's required for certification. Pretty straightforward. But the green rater is the one that actually takes this and submits the project for certification. So they have to sort of sign off on everything, that it meets their that they verified every measure, and then submit it to the provider for certification. One thing about LEED for Homes is that every home has to have an energy rater. A lot of times the green rater is an energy rater. Sometimes they may be using somebody else. So there's several projects where I'm doing both roles, and sometimes I'll have a different energy rater do the energy rater piece, or maybe an energy rater comes to me as a green rater and says, hey, we'd like to work with you on this project. Our client wants to get LEED certified. Can we do this? So it's flexible in that respect, but the key is that there's an energy rater involved for that, the installation verification, as well as one of the things that's mandatory is a blower door test. And if you have ductwork going in unconditioned space, the ducts need to be tested for leakage as well. And those are all functions that an energy rater performs. So you can do a search for green raters. This is actually, I did a search in Illinois, who the green raters are, and there's 4 of us right now that come up. So you can see, if you go to usgbc.org/people/green raters, you can do a search for your own state or area, etc. So the provider, another organization, I mentioned that the Alliance is actually a provider, AES. And so what we do is, as a provider level, is deliver the program on behalf of USGBC. So part of what that means is that we do an initial preliminary rating, so the green raters submit their initial ratings to the provider for review and feedback, to look for any specific issues or problem areas, or try to address any questions up front rather than trying to be proactive rather than reactive. The provider is also really good for providing technical support around the rating system. Odds are that your green rater has not seen everything there is to know in the world of LEED. But the provider has seen much more because they're overseeing many, many green raters. And so there's sort of this built-in support system structure that's really good for determining how certain things are going to be addressed and interpreted. One of the complaints sometimes people have with the commercial versions of LEED is that you submit CIR and you pay a fee and you don't hear back, you don't know who you hear back from, and you can't communicate with them directly because there's a chance they could be on the final review team. And that's one of the nice things about the more decentralized role in LEED for Homes is that we have these provider organizations that are local. I think there's 38 of us now around the country, and they do provide that technical support and quality management over the green raters. And at the end of the project, it's actually the provider that submits the certification documents to USGBC. So it goes through quite a thorough review process of project team submitting to the green rater submitting to the provider, and provider submitting to USGBC for ultimate certification. On the delivery team side, we've got the project team who's designing, planning, and building the home. And then perhaps having a lead AP on the project as well, who can provide more expertise on implementation. And some of the stuff can be done by the green rater. The difference is, and it's a special line that green raters have to be careful not to cross, is that you can't be making decisions for the project team and then be responsible for signing off on those decisions as the independent verifier, right? So if you're involved in any of those activities, it's usually, it's basically you have to, recuse yourself from the project, or the project team is to have somebody, a consultant to perform that instead of you as the rater. So there, just to keep that a nice clean line and protect the integrity of the program. So if you look at the traditional construction process, where things typically line up, you've got your early schematic design, more detailed design, construction happening, and certification at the end. Sort of when things start to happen is this map sort of shows when you ideally should be doing things. So choosing your provider and rater early in the process, registering early, doing the construction verification visits, and then at the end submitting for certification. And what do we mean by submitting for certification? Well, this is the documentation that's required are these 5 bullet points. So we need performance test results like the HERS rating for the project. We need to see there's the on-site field verification that's performed, right, by the rater of both the energy credits as well as other measures such as whether or not the erosion control silt fencing is in place, and etc. And then doing, in terms of actual documentation, it's pretty minimal. We have accountability forms, and you see an example of that here, where this is basically customized for a specific trade. So I commonly will see a HVAC accountability form for the person responsible for designing the mechanical system. I'll see one sometimes for a landscape professional, because as a green rater, I'm not trained to judge whether the design is appropriate or accurate. I can just tell if the installed plants look like they match the design that was intended that was planned by the landscape professional. So they take ultimate sign off over the accountability for some of those measures. The other so there's basically 4 things that are submitted at the end of the project that make their way all the way to USGBC, and that's the project checklist, the accountability forms that I just discussed, and then there's 2 forms related to durability. One is a risk evaluation, and one is a inspection checklist, and those will be covered in the last session, session 4. Kind of recap on all that. All right. So what does all this cost, right? You're probably wondering that. Your clients are certainly wondering it. And I like to say that, a lot of the stuff should be stuff that's happening anyway. One of the things that's nice is that these programs like LEED reward good construction, quality construction, and some of this is already happening that may not necessarily add hard costs, like, orienting the site or reducing your construction waste isn't a hard cost because you end up paying for less dumpsters. But there are, of course, some added costs. There is a lot of work being done by the green rater, so it's fair to expect that that's going to be a cost that's probably going to be higher than the actual registration and certification fees that are paid for the project. So just to sort of keep it in scale, and it does vary from project to project and from rater to rater. So, I encourage you to seek out multiple bids and quotes, etc. And it's also a way to evaluate. During that process, you can evaluate competency as well, because you don't want to be necessarily going with the lowest bidder if it's somebody that's not going to help you your project's success. All right, so any questions that have come up on any of this? Here we have one. Question on the home size adjuster. If the house is extremely large, what is the maximum number of points that have to be adjusted? What would be the maximum number of points to be adjusted? So, yeah, that's a good question, and basically what's come up with that is there's a cap on how many points you can achieve for making it small of a max of 10, but they actually don't have a cap on the penalty side of things. So you could have a point penalty of 20 or 30 or 40 points if it was a really, really big house. It really all depends on what's built into the calculator. So in terms of addressing that, you can't really reduce that because the square footage is what it is, most likely, as long as we're talking about conditioned space. That's really the key criteria. So what that basically means is that a project would have to earn more credits elsewhere in the rating system to help make up for the deficit caused by being a large structure. Okay. So a little bit of a recap quiz. Who's the person that might be advising the project team on strategies to earn LEED credits? This is most likely, the answer that's being looked for here is the LEED AP homes. The rater might be helping provide some education and examples of strategies that other projects have done. I will do that frequently as a rater. But ultimately, in terms of taking responsibility and making decisions, it should be the LEED AP homes if there's one on the project, or just somebody from the project team itself. Who is doing the on-site performance tests? Well, hopefully you know by now that it should at least be an energy rater, and is probably the green rater on the project. If the green rater is not an energy rater, they're still responsible for that component being done. So they need to partner with or subcontract or whatever, figure out how to work with a energy rater who can conduct those on-site performance tests. And who submits the documentation to USGBC for certification? That would be the LEED for Homes provider. Okay, I'm going to take a quick break here before we get into the materials and resources section. And pause to see if there's any other questions that you have at this point. Okay, well, with that, let's go on to the materials and resources section. This is the category. This is the first category of the rating system that we're going to go through, and this really focuses on the environmental impact of materials that are brought into the project's building, and kind of minimizing the amount of materials that goes to landfill, taken out of the building. So it's kind of the waste in and waste out assessment. And the ultimate goal here is to reduce the quantity of waste that's produced through the construction process by improving the building, using responsible procurement, implementing certain framing measures that help support these types of goals as well. And the way that this comes together in LEED for Homes is basically looking through these credits. So what's nice is these concepts are basically organized around the efficiencies in which the building is framed. So the framing efficiencies, as you can see here. And what do we mean by framing efficiency? Well, basically what starts to happen is that we get prescriptive lists of items that can be done to make a building efficient. And we're going to go through those in more detail. This is just sort of an overview slide at this point. But doing things like advanced framing to help minimize the amount of lumber that's used in a building. The second area is choosing and specifying environmentally preferable products. So this could be FSC certified tropical lumber, and using items that could be recycled content or have low emission characteristics, improving the air quality for the occupants, and also using locally sourced materials. And finally, there's a credit that is involved with looking at how we can reduce construction waste in the process of building this green home and divert waste from landfills and from incinerators too. So again, those three items are basically turned into 3 credits in LEED. We have 1 credit for material efficient framing, 1 credit for environmentally preferable products, and 1 credit for waste management. And this is an area where we do need at least a minimum number of points, and so in this case, that's a minimum of 2 points to be earned, and which is pretty achievable for all projects that I've ever really run into. So the credits these are sort of overarching categories that have many sub-credits beneath them. And so you'll see credit 1 is actually broken out into 5 different types of items. And so these first 5 lines all relate to framing and how buildings are framed, which is our traditional construction material on residential projects, right? Wood framing. And there's a combination of prerequisites here as well as items that are eligible to earn points. So we're not going to go through every one of these things during the course. We're going to kind of focus on some of the hotspot items, and we're going to focus on the ones that are white. But I'll try to touch on some of the ones that are in gray as well, just so that you get some exposure to these. So the first item that's worth discussing here is it's a prerequisite, the framing order waste factor limit. So this is kind of a confusing title. I really don't like the title at all because this word waste is in there. So everybody thinks that you're talking about construction waste. And what we're really talking about, what this credit's looking for, is to optimize the use of materials. So it really has to do with the ordering side. So like the word order should be bolded or something here. But we're looking at making sure that the right amount of wood comes on the job site, because if there's too much wood that comes up, a lot of this wood ends up either going into waste or being unnecessarily used in the house framing. Oh, we had this extra stud, so we're going to just add it here next to the window to make it stronger, right? Well, it's a waste of material. It also makes for, a more energy inefficient structure as well. So the requirements for this prerequisite are to limit the overall waste factor to 10% or less. And what we mean by that is looking at the waste factor is defined as the percentage of framing, the percentage of framing material that's ordered that's in excess of what's estimated. So if you're estimated to need, 50 2x8s for a project, there's a waste factor built in. They might, the lumber yard might be sending 57, for example. Well, now you're over 10% waste because you've got 7 extra 2x8s, and a 10% limit would mean that you couldn't have more than 5 extra 2x8s if you have 50 ordered or 50 estimated. So usually construction teams will get a few extra pieces of lumber because you might get twisted or warped or studs or etc. But the prerequisite here is that you can't have more than 10% waste on the order side. So a lot of times if you get a detailed, one way to help do this is to meet that is to meet credit 1.2, which requires detailed framing documents. And so this is actually, it's a little bit more than just a floor joist framing plan, which is sometimes included in architectural plans. They're really looking for detailed framing documents to accompany specific locations, spaces, and sizing in all framing walls, roofs, floors, and ceiling. So not just a floor plan, but we want to be able to, maybe have an elevation view of a house and see what the framing should look like before it's actually put up and in place. And you can see on this image here that somebody's got a BIM model, 3D model of a home, showing what the framing should look like in that structure before it's even begun. And the idea here is that you have this detailed plan, then the framers can use that as they're building each section of the wall to help minimize that waste. And there's a related note to that we're not going to really cover much. Wait, I do have a slide for it, actually. Anyway, there's a related note that to accompany the detailed framing plans, you can have a detailed cut list and lumber order. That's worth another point. So it's worth noting that if you're doing a gut rehab project like that foreclosed home I showed, you can automatically earn 1.2 and 1.3, MR 1.2 and 1.3 credits if you're reusing 90% of a building. So if it's a gut job that doesn't have a major addition, and you're keeping the framing and you're just gutting down to the studs and reusing that, there's actually a couple extra points here that you can get for reusing the building. So here's the other half of that credit. So this credit for the detailed lumber order, it's actually something that you can't achieve unless you first did the detailed framing documents, right? You have to first have the plan before you implement it in terms of buying the wood. And that's what's emphasized in the gray here. So the next part of this credit one is framing efficiencies, And this is basically a prescriptive checklist of, does the criteria get met for any of these measures in the checklist for 90% of the structure. So the idea here is that conventional framing uses about up to 20% more material than is what is actually needed for the structure, and that's a lot of extra wood. And the reason this credit really focuses around wood framing is because that's what 90% of the housing stock is built from in this country. So the idea is to try and reward this, to get people thinking about some of these measures earlier on. So doing things like trusses, space 24 on center, which is what this photo is showing here, is something that's rewarded. Doing open web floor trusses, is rewarded because it uses less material, and you can get wider spans out of it too. One of the cool things about open web floor trusses is that, as you can see here, that's a nice space if you've got to run a trunk line for an HVAC system or any major plumbing lines or anything. You can do that and still not interrupt the clear span of, or have to build a soffit or anything of that nature. So kind of a dual benefit there. Other items that are examples of framing efficiencies are structurally insulated panels, or SIPs. You may have heard of them, either for the floors or the roof. In this case, you see them being built for the floors. It looks like they might be have the roofs ready to go on the ground there. But basically, these get put together in at least 4-foot intervals with one kind of framing member in between them. So it's a very, very efficient envelope with basically a 4-foot on-center stud that helps hold them all together. And when it's assembled, it's a pretty strong project. It creates a pretty strong envelope. One of the key things actually to note is that it's actually got OSB on both sides typically of a sheet of spray foam. Basically, it's foamed in place in between, so you get a really nice insulating value from these as well as being material efficient. Other framing efficiencies are doing stud spacing more than 16 on center. So 16 is common, but doing things 7 studs in an 8-foot span instead of 8, such as 19.2 on center, or probably more commonly would be the 24 on center stud spacing. Those are rewarded here. And it's worth noting that 24 on center stud spacing is actually now required for Energy Star homes as well. Some of the other measures, sizing headers for loads. In the other photo, you don't need large headers above windows if the load is being carried on another roof. If it's a gable-style roof and you're in the end gable, you don't need a large header there because the roof load is being transferred to the side gable walls. And so having minimal header openings is rewarded instead of having a bunch of extra material being used in those areas. So obviously it takes some coordination with the framers on site to understand which headers are meant to be structural and which ones are not structural. Other examples of measures being done, ladder blocking. And what that means is that an interior wall joining an exterior wall, instead of using a full-length stud to nail that up against, they're using basically cut-off pieces that are probably scrap or waste lumber from something else, using those across 2 studs and nailing the adjacent wall into it. Sorry about that. So that's rewarded. Drywall clips. Another thing that's rewarded to help eliminate an extra stud in the wall. You can see this is actually a photo from that home tour that I helped coordinate. And so, just to kind of recap some of these framing efficiencies, they all earn different levels of points in the rating system. The ones that have a bigger impact earn more points. And again, these are all optional things to get because they're points, they're not prerequisites. And the cool thing is that if you do a lot of these things, you can actually take extra credit for them as innovation credit for exemplary performance, which we'll talk about a little bit later in the fourth week. But basically, there's options to get more points if you do a lot of these measures. The final framing-related credit is credit 1.5, and this is basically for doing off-site fabrication. So this was actually a pretty cool project in Chicago. It was actually recently highlighted on Dwell's website about a month ago. It's a prefab house, a LEED Platinum home that was actually built at a plant, and then, as you can see, in a narrow lot, they had to crane it into place. There was, I think, about 4 modules in this structure that came together. So if you do this, if you have off-site fabrication or even panelization that's done off-site for all the roof walls and flooring, then there are you can claim 4 points for that. So it's a pretty big credit, and that just makes the site much more inherently efficient. The plants, the operations at these manufacturing plants and the panelization plants, they are inherently motivated to be efficient, so there's very little waste that actually ends up being generated at these plants. So it's a much more waste-efficient type of construction. Okay, on to the credit 2. So the first aspect of credit 2 is a prerequisite that says you have to have FSC certified wood if it's tropical. So this does not mean that every framing member and stud and joist in your home needs to be FSC certified. What this is saying is that if you use any tropical lumber, then that tropical lumber has to be FSC certified. And this is a big thing to note. So what might be some tropical lumbers that are used on homes? Some examples are mahogany doors. I've seen a lot of ipe used. It's a tropical lumber that's used as a rain screen. Brazilian cherry flooring, for example. And even in some cabinets, you'll find, or sometimes as an underlayment, you'll find wood that's Luan. And Luan is commonly a tropical lumber. So if your project or any of your suppliers are using that type of lumber, then it needs to be FSC certified. Otherwise, if you're not using tropical wood, you don't need to have that. So the other part of this prerequisite is that you provide notices to suppliers that you, as a project team, prefer to purchase products that are tropical only if they're FSC certified. And you also need to request the country of manufacture for each product supplied. So it's kind of a paperwork-intensive credit if you're going to be using any tropical lumber. And one thing that's worth noting is that if you find any reused or reclaimed materials, they are considered to already have had a first life, so that kind of exempts them from this requirement. You're not going to find FSC reclaimed wood. It's just that paperwork just doesn't exist. So they'll let you be exempt with that. I should probably check to see if there's any questions related to framing and tropical lumber. Okay, here's one. In projects where the main construction material is concrete and no structural framing is included, can the project earn credits through considering framing used to frame concrete elements? And if the home has no framing, do you automatically earn or lose those credits? It's a great question, and as you could tell, the MR Credit 1 section was really intended for people that are doing wood frame construction. That being said, USGBC, of course, recognizes lots of people do construction with other types of materials, and there is a, if you open up the LEED for Homes Excel checklist, there's a tab called Guidance Documents, which is a great index of all kinds of supplemental reference documents pertaining to specific situations. So for example, there's a guidance document for commercial spaces in a multifamily building. There's a guidance document for doing a gut rehab project and what specific things might need to be done differently. And there's a guidance document for non-wood frame structures that talks about how to recognize and reward those types of structures that are framed without wood, and how you would claim points for those. So again, check on the Excel document for the checklist itself, which if you haven't already downloaded, we'll send you a link to that after class. But open up that Excel document, look at the Guidance Docs tab, and then look for the relevant document. Okay, MR Credit 2.2 is the second part of this materials credit. The first part was the no FSC tropical lumber. The second part is rewarding environmental attributes of things. So this could be, for example, on the photo on the left, you might have recycled content countertops and cabinets that are made of recycled content like MDF with no added urea formaldehyde. Each of those would earn a half point each for the project under this EPP credit. The photo on the right, this is actually was a really interesting gut rehab job. And for those of you familiar with the way they built buildings before World War II, commonly, instead of drywall, we used plaster and lath, which lath was little pieces of 1-inch wood that were nailed up on between the studs, and then a coating of plaster was smeared on, actually 3 coats of plaster, to give you the finished walls. Right, and so this gut rehab project, they deconstructed everything, saved every piece of lath, and the builder actually took those pieces of lath, planed them all down, glued them together, sanded them, planed them, and what you're seeing is the end grain of the lath put together as stair treads and risers for a stairwell. Pretty remarkable effort to keep waste out of the landfill. And great looking design too. Just an incredible amount of effort that went into that. Anyway, that's I'm showing it here because it basically, this is something that could be considered both recycled content because it came from the previous structure, and it's also something that when you have salvaged pieces of equipment or salvaged components in the home, you're going to earn the credit for them being salvaged and recycled. You'll also earn a half point for it being locally produced, right? Because it came from on site. So this next slide might help make it a little bit clearer. You basically have 3 buckets on which any product can be graded. Any major component can be graded. And the way this is done is much different than other versions of LEED. So if you've worked in other versions of LEED, kind of forget everything you know about those versions, because this is not overall percentage based on cost or anything like that. This is straight, it's on a component-by-component basis. So for the cabinets, like we saw on the previous slide, what percent of the cabinets have either, if 90% of the cabinets meet one of these attributes, you can check the box and earn a half point. If 90% of the wall framing is reclaimed because you're doing an existing building as a gut rehab without a major addition, then you can actually earn points for that here as well, being reclaimed exterior framing, reclaimed roofing. There's like 20 different items or components that you can earn credit for in one of these 3 categories of environmentally preferable, low emitting, or locally produced. Some of the caveats to note here is that when you're looking at specifications for manufacturers, a lot of times you'll see recycled content, and what they're showing you the percentage-wise is actually their pre-consumer or post-industrial content. And to earn credit in LEED for homes, that would need to be above 50%. So 35% pre-consumer content is not going to earn any credit in LEED for homes. Similarly, another item to kind of look out for is locally produced. So again, I'm in Chicago. I don't know if you're familiar with Pella windows, but Pella windows are made in Iowa, which is within 500 miles of a project in Chicago. However, if you're getting their vinyl window line, they're actually the vinyl is actually made from, what we're looking at is the raw materials, and the vinyl is made from oil, which more than likely is not from within 500 miles of the project site. So, you kind of have to look at the key word being extracted and processed, not just manufactured and assembled within 500 miles of the project site. And again, if you're doing something if you're doing a gut rehab type of situation, and 90% of a component is unchanged or still in place, you can earn credit for it being both locally produced and for it being up above environmentally preferable because it's salvaged. So let me put this in a little more defined terms. Let's say we have a project that has all these attributes. They're using this nice denim insulation for 96% of their project, made from cotton, right? It's a renewable resource. They're using bamboo for 92% of the flooring. They're using FSC certified plywood throughout for all the sheathing. They got a nice budget for this. They're using Green Seal certified paints, low emitting paints. And they're using recycled aggregate for all of their foundation work in the basement walls, in the patio, flat work, and for the driveway in the home. How many points would this earn? Well, what it comes out to is you basically have 6.5 total points for 11 items. So you get a half credit for this being recycled content, because it's recycled post-consumer denim, or pre-consumer denim, I'm sorry. You get credit for flooring is such a big component that they actually allow you to double up on flooring in terms of points. And so you get 1 point for the bamboo flooring, so 2 half points basically. There's also a low emitting credit. If 90% of your flooring is hard flooring, you get a low emissions credit, with the idea being that hard flooring doesn't trap dust and allergens like carpet does. Then you have FSC sheathing, which for 2 components, roof and wall, so that's a full point there. And the recycled content aggregate would be actually 2 points, 1 for the patio, 1 for the driveway, 1 for the foundation walls, and a half point for low emitting paints. This really you really sort of have to spend some time with the MR 2.2 section and credits. We could probably do a full hour just on that section if we really had the time. I just want to caution you that when you're looking at manufacturer spec sheets, be careful. You'll see things like this all the time, which say MRC 4. There is no credit 4 in LEED for Homes, first of all. Second of all, there's no credit 5 in LEED for Homes. And what they're showing you is their LEED new construction, LEED new commercial interiors, and LEED existing buildings, and how their product complies. Well, if you look at all these specifications and look through and see what would apply for LEED for Homes, there's only one item here that would count for credit. Right? It's only the items that are this 50% post-industrial recycled content for the Neo floor tile. So just a word of caution when you're looking at spec sheets is make sure that there's a column or a sheet or something that's specific to LEED for Homes if you're going to be relying on that in your specifications. Okay, finally, the last credit, pretty easy, straightforward one. The prerequisite here is that you have to create a plan for construction waste management. How is waste going to be handled? Are you going to be sorting on site, or are you going to be having a single dumpster like you see here that's taken off site and maybe the waste hauler can do sorting, which is commonly what I see in my market people doing? Are there places that might take some of the waste, or what might be considered waste, such as there's a warehouse for building material overstock, basically, called the rebuilding exchange that some people in my market are using. So, maybe there's some kind of plan on how waste might be diverted. And that's the prerequisite. and then when you start to implement that plan and earn points, you'll start to earn points for reducing waste beyond normal levels. So the prerequisite, just more specifically, is that there's you investigate local options, and you try to document the diversion rate separate from land clearing and demolition. So it's really once construction starts. And as you create more, you reduce further, then you can earn more credit. And I've seen people do things like in the photo here, you can mulch lumber, turn it into mulch. I have one project that took the shipping pallets and turned that into mulch. Making sure cardboard's recycled. These could be, you could have separate bins for some of the stuff, or just do it off-site and have the hauler take it away. However you can document it is up to you in order to prove these points, as long as you're meeting the thresholds of the rating system. So these numbers are kind of meaningless, so I'm going to skip this slide and go to the table that kind of shows, if you look at the more that's diverted, the more points you're going to need to accrue. Most projects I see are typically using this fourth column, percentage diverted, as the way that they're getting reports from their waste haulers to earn the points. Although sometimes you might have something like, I had one panelized project that actually just certified at LEED Platinum last week. It was panelized and built off-site mostly, so the on-site waste was pretty small, and they actually went through it was more advantageous to go through the weight per square foot of the conditioned space rather than going through the overall percentage diverted. They got like an extra half point or something. So that's the kind of thing that's flexible and up to however you want to submit it for certification at the very end. If you're tracking it all these ways, you can kind of choose the one that's most favorable. And just a little thought about some of the synergies here. When you talk about material efficiency, a lot of times you can see how these framing efficiencies will end up creating a more energy efficient structure, right? So it's going to help with your energy performance and HERS rating if you're doing stud spacing at a wider interval than your standard 16-inch on center. So here's just sort of some project examples. Here's a project that used reclaimed salvaged lumber from a burnt building that was turned into their ceiling, recycled content drywall on all the walls. This is probably the extreme example of a gut rehab. It looks like they saved like one interior room on this project. This is in California somewhere. And really gutted the whole rest of the house on the exterior and really kind of rebuilt the whole entire thing. Just kind of a quick little review question for you. What attributes do qualifying environmentally preferable materials have? This is where, like, a good example of something you might see on the LEED AP Homes exam. Right, you'll see various things like there's not really a Rainforest Alliance certified lumber. They certify other things. The distance that we're looking at for local points is 500 miles, not 100. Right, we're looking for low emissions of VOCs, not high emissions. So A would be the correct answer here. Okay, got a little bit of time for questions. I'm going to flip over, see if you have any on the materials section. Any additional questions at this point? Feel free to type them in. And I'm going to just real quickly kind of show you the last couple of slides, which kind of a recap of but your homework assignment for the week is to use the LEED for Homes checklist, the Excel document that we'll email to you. And on that Excel document, you'll see a couple of tabs. One is the summary tab. So if you have a specific project in mind, you should use that. And if you don't have a specific project in mind, send me an email and we'll hook you up with one. So fill out the summary tab, to the best of your ability, and specifically the bottom of the summary tab, which is where you have things like the home size and the bedrooms, and you can kind of get a feel for. Watch if you toggle between the summary tab and the checklist tab, you can see how different home sizes will adjust the points on the rating system. So fill out the summary tab and the MR section, or materials resources section, of the checklist tab. So it doesn't say checklist tab up there, but it's right next to the summary tab on the Excel document. So the first two tabs are summary and checklist. You need to fill out summary and the MR section. And then we'll continue next week with the and the coming weeks with the rest of the credit categories. This will be the same time, same place next week. And in the meantime, if you want to check out, we've got several case studies and other resources on our website, as well as information about